welcome. Normally we do this session in person and we meet somewhere along the wall and it's all very lovely and we have cake and we go for a nice walk, and for me it's actually one of the highlights. I know, as sad as that sounds, it's the highlight of our sort of calendar when we get everybody together, because all of a sudden our WallCAP staff team becomes a huge big team, and I absolutely love that. I feel that we're all kind of wanting the same for WallCAP and all just passionate about the wall. So that's a really happy day. But obviously we are on Zoom again, which I hope is okay with everybody. We made this decision quite early on before Christmas that we would do this on Zoom, just because obviously we didn't know how the pandemic was going to pan out at that point. As I mentioned, we normally run this session around the last sort of third to last week of January, for a simple reason that it's Hadrian's birthday, and it's Hadrian's birthday on Monday the 24th. And for those of you who are up to speed with all the Hadrian's Wall 1900th festival, that starts on Monday, with it being Hadrian's birthday. So did anybody bring cake? I've got a small offering. Anybody bring cake? I'm having a look. Oh yeah, there is. Yes, brilliant. Excellent. I thought you would be like, oh, well, not indulge you, but you did. Thank you. That makes me happy.
I've already eaten mine, Kerry.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay, Rob. That's brilliant.
I thought it was for Monday.
It's a cake weekend. I always have a birthday weekend, so I think we should do that. Sorry, a birthday week. So I think Hadrian can have a week. It's fine. So the purpose of this session is to have a little look back over last year, all of the things that we did as a group, as a project, and really kind of celebrate that, because given the situation that we've been in, I think we've done incredibly well to even have any faces on this screen. For example, you could have all just thought, do you know what, but you stuck with us, and I think that's really, we value that a lot. So we're going to have a look back over some of the activity that we did last year. Rob's going to talk us around lots of the sort of different activities that we've been involved with. Then we're going to move on to look at the heritage at risk work, of which Jane is going to be talking about that work. And then Ian, oh, he's there, brilliant, didn't see you earlier. Ian's going to be talking about the stone sourcing and dispersal work. And then we're going to have a little look forward as well. I'm conscious that one or two people on this screen might be absolute newbies to WallCAP. So just for the purposes of our newbies, welcome. I'm Kerry, the volunteer coordinator and community liaison officer. So all the emails you get peppered with are from me, for which I make no apologies because I can't see you in person. So I'm just going to pepper you over emails and Zoom calls and things. We've got Dr. Rob Collins, if you give a wave, Rob, who's our project manager, also lecturer at Newcastle University. So he's the wall nerd, self-confessed wall nerd. That's okay, Rob? Yeah. We've got Dr. Jane Harrison, who's our community archaeologist, who'll be speaking soon. We've got Dr. Ian Keel, who's our community geologist, who'll be talking about the stone sourcing and dispersal work. We've got Catherine Murphy, who's our project support officer, also archaeologist, helping Jane with some of the excavations. You've probably met us all at some point, but I just thought it was useful to do those introductions again. So yeah, that's the format for this. It is supposed to be a social event, so although we are just heads on screens, we try and make this as informal as possible. The agenda that I pulled together was purely for our benefit, to make sure that we covered everything we wanted to say and we didn't, we kept to time. So we've got a couple of hours. We'll take a break at about 3. And again, we're trying to keep these presentations relatively kind of short and snappy, and you're welcome to drop any questions or observations in the chat. If you want to ask anything, obviously, just put an emoji hand or an actual hand up if you'd like to. It's very much for you, this session. It just gives us a chance to all see each other. Like I say, it's so lovely to see so many faces on the screen together. So without further ado, I don't think I have anything else to say apart from I'm going to hand over to Rob, who's going to talk to us a little bit about some of our highlights from last year. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you, Kerry, and it's lovely to see everyone again. I know we're a little bit into the year, but Happy New Year, in case I haven't seen you beforehand. I'm very conscious that Jane and Ian and Catherine have interesting, exciting things to say about what's been done. So my role is to kind of be a bit of a ringmaster, not that I want to equate our project to a circus, but to kind of drum up and let you know what's kind of happened and what's going on. And I'll leave all the cool, really fun things to them so that I don't steal their thunder. As Kerry said, the past year has been absolutely incredible. We have done so many things, and I can't begin to tell you how impressive the amount of material we've done, given the very dynamic circumstances, that's the word we're supposed to use, for around COVID, in our ability to do things in person, to do things online. It's been almost 2 complete years since kind of COVID first came about. And that's very strongly impacted the project. There are many things that we wanted to do in person, many more things we want to do in person, including more field work, both for the HAR, the Heritage at Risk, and the SSD, the Stone Sourcing Dispersal strands, that we had to get creative around what we could do digitally when we were all in lockdown. And as soon as we were all allowed out of the house, all of you responded with great enthusiasm, which is wonderful. And really what happened in this past year is we packed everything in as much as we could that was reasonable, without Jane and Catherine and Ian, Carrie and I going insane. You can see that we did. My beard is a little bit whiter. I won't say anything about anyone else's beards. That would be impolite. But it's definitely been very busy, and we're very thankful for all the hard work and enthusiasm that all of you have brought to the project. It definitely makes all of it worthwhile for us, because sometimes when you're sitting there arguing on the phone with someone about portaloos because the person at the other end just can't get your order right, it's very nice to see you on site smiling and happy and using the portaloos that did eventually arrive magically, with a few curse words in between. So as I say, it's just great that everyone's been so enthusiastic, and we really, really appreciate that. All the hard work, all the SSD work, Jane and Ian will cover. I think what I need to say is a little bit sad, but I think it's important to just kind of rip the Band-Aid off. We are really in our final months of WallCAP. So it was wonderful that Lottery was able to give us an extension because of COVID. We've used that to the best of our ability, but WallCAP can't go on forever. So we are now genuinely in the final months of the project. The project will end the 30th of September of this year, 2022. And so really what remains is actually some of the legacy work, which we always wanted from our project, but has gotten a bit sidetracked and sidelined, is we scrambled around doing things digitally and then packing everything in person over the past year. And that's really, now that we've tried our best to whet your appetites for doing things along Hadrian's Wall, is to take that appetite and let you decide your own menu. If I continue the eating metaphor, I don't have cake. I think you can see where this is coming from. But all the enthusiasm that we've seen, all that enthusiasm that you've brought to the project, we want to support that. We want to help that continue to grow. And so one of the purposes of today and in the coming months is to ask you that question. Well, how can we help feed that appetite? How can we make sure that you continue to have the wall fever, as it were, and that you're getting the proper medicine for it, which is obviously more wall. So those sort of things are what we want to do in these final months of the project, alongside of the hard work that Jane will be doing in terms of writing up the various hard fieldwork reports, that Ian is doing writing up the SSD reports. Catherine is working very hard on the Hadrian's Wall GIS that's part of our project. And you'll see a couple of cool maps, I think, about that later. So we have these other things that we're trying to bring all our results together to make sure that all the hard work that you've done lasts beyond the project, is visible and is seen past our project, so that you can kind of point to that book or website and say, I was there, I did that. So that's important, but we also, it's not just that we get to this point and we leave you hanging high and dry. So it's really important to think about what you have enjoyed about this project, what you would like to see carried forward, what sort of things you think you could be involved with to help carry things forward as well. And not only do we have Carrie here for that, but also we're very lucky that we're joined by Abby, who's not only one of our volunteers, but also is part of a community role for the Hadrian's Wall 1900th Festival. And that's another fortunate thing about our extension this year, is the 1900th Festival for Hadrian's Wall is happening this year. So in addition to the things that we normally do, there should be a whole range of other wall opportunities for you to get involved with. Now, I think the one thing that I can say that we're definitely doing in coming months is Carrie and I were able to recently appoint a contractor for a Hadrian's Wall Village Atlas project. And this is something that will carry on over the next 6 months, maybe 7 months, if I have to do my counting on my fingers correctly, but the next 6 or 7 months. And we've identified kind of key areas, key villages where we know that there's a good kind of community that's already in very active. And it's really to kind of highlight that community spirit that you see all along Hadrian's Wall. And so this is something that there will be many more opportunities to contribute to that. And so we've appointed the archaeological practice, who's done work on village atlases before in the Northeast. And actually, they have a really impressive portfolio of that work. They're really good at working with people. They're really good at taking feedback and working on a new piece of information, something that, you know, that someone local knew, that a local farmer knew, that no one else knew, that they say, that's great, we didn't know that before, and they run with it and make that accessible for everyone. So I think Carrie and I are really excited about that, actually, because it's just a fun thing to do. So that's the one opportunity I can definitely promise will be coming up through the next months. But that's kind of what I had to say. There's been lots of exciting work as things open up again. If you haven't been, I would suggest that you go to the Great North Museum and see the kind of laser projection that we have on some of the altar stones there. Some of the exhibition work that some of you were involved with in Tully House also opened up very quietly in December. So actually, we're going to hopefully have a proper launch for that in coming weeks as well. But between the Great North Museum in Newcastle and Tully House Museum in Carlisle, there's also some new exhibitions there that can go and be visited too, if you're having a bit of a blue day or the weather's a bit wet outside and you can't be walking along the wall. And so I think that's it for me. As I say, I don't want to steal Jane and Ian's thunder, but I'm very happy to take questions and also just waiting for Carrie to tell me to shut up.
No, thanks, Rob. I think that's nice just to get a bit of a flavour of kind of what's coming forward. It's really hard to condense all of this into a few hours because there's so much to cover. So we're very conscious of that. And if there are questions, we can answer them in this sort of forum or sort of separately afterwards. I think unless there's anything burning, we might just kind of move on because just so we make sure we have enough time. I think we can have a bit of a chat at the end if people are happy to do it that way. Unless there's anything anybody wants to raise straight away. You're welcome to raise your hand and unmute and ask. Nope, nobody's waving frantically at me. That's okay. Right. Right. Thanks for that, Rob. I'm going to seamlessly just hand over to, I think, Jane, you're next.
Okay. Well, there's an awful lot to cover because you all managed to do some extraordinary work, particularly at Cambeck and Corbridge. And I'll be talking about Corbridge at the end. Some of the results from the experts on the various finds and things are beginning to come in just slowly. And I think you'll appreciate this lovely aerial shot that Nev Hutchinson did amongst a number of others. And there you can see our two trenches. Here's trench 5 with the building outline. And I'm going to talk more about both of the trenches. There's trench 4 in the corner over there. And I'll be coming back and talking a bit more about the details of those two trenches in a little bit. But what I'm going to do is you can see on the top a map showing all of the surveys and bits of vegetation clearance and excavation and repair work that's been done by WallCAP. And at the bottom are the 4 sites I'm going to talk about that are focused on this year. So that's Port Carlisle, Cambeck, Corbridge and the Valamet Heading on the Wall. So those are the 4 ones that I'm going to cover this time, because last year we were talking about Catstairs and Peel Gap and Walltown Crags under the HAR umbrella. Okay, so Port Carlisle. Here we are in the much less investigated west end of Hadrian's Wall, and you can see on the map the green line of the wall following the coast, more or less. And this expanse up here, it's not very clear on this sort of LiDAR map, but that's the Solway Firth, and the little purple triangle is the site that we were working on. and you can see that the blue are either confirmed or assumed, are confirmed sites of mile castles and turrets, and the little red ones are assumed sites. And here we are right at the end of the wall at Bowness on Solway. And in a way, Port Carlisle was a rather different sort of enterprise for us, because it was specifically targeting a very troublesome heritage at risk site that had been on the register for years and years and years. A little bit of surviving, upstanding, faced wall, the only little bit surviving in the whole of this stretch that you can see and beyond to the east. Not accessible to be seen by walkers who go a bit further north, closer to the coast, by a gateway being persistently hit by ever bigger farm machinery, inevitably so, and causing problems for the farmer who needed a wider gate. So it was a sort of combination of investigative work, looking at the fate and the character and the history of the wall in that place, but also rescuing, that little bit of wall, and ultimately the great gate moving the gate from the location it was in, next to the wall, to another place where it would be bigger and not impact on the wall. So there you can see the sort of landscape that we're dealing with, another of the very many different sorts of landscape that the wall marches through. And the red line is the line of the wall. You can see it's this kink here looked at looking east. And it's quite interesting, the fate of the wall and the history of the wall in that area is actually really interesting, because right now, the photograph you've just seen makes it look incredibly rural and actually rather isolated out on that sort of northwest peninsula. But in the past, of course, it's been heavily impacted by railways and canals in major attempts to move people and iron and coal around this part of the world. And you can see on the map here, you've got the green line, which was first the route of the canal built in 1823 from Carlisle to what had been to a village which was then renamed Port Carlisle at that point. When that canal failed and was no longer needed, it was actually turned into the bed of the railway that then ran to Port Carlisle. And subsequently, not only was there this line running up to there was also the viaduct running across the Solway. So you can see lots of big infrastructure projects that will have needed wall stone, will have used wall stone, if not for some of the main structures, for ancillary things like signal boxes and housing for workers and that kind of thing. So lots of nice accessible stone to be used there. So this is the site itself, and there you can see this is the wall in question, a very small and slightly sorry stub end of wall, but it is the only standing bit, and it was, we know that therefore there are foundations and things surviving underneath, and it was an opportunity to preserve it, to move the gate, and to look further. What's interesting about where it is, so here's the gateway, a narrow Victorian width gateway that is not really big enough right now, is that this field, the southern field, is higher than the northern field, and this northern field, which abuts onto the road and then onto the Solway Firth, regularly floods. So there's something interesting going on there. And what we did was we did geophysics. That was done last year, sorry, 2 years ago. And then last year we did the excavations, we did trenches here and here, and this is the location of the stub end of the wall and the old field gate. And what we were trying to do was this, you can see on the old map is a building. And we anticipated that building would have removed all traces of the wall in that location, so we could move the gate to that place, and that was what we needed to check. The geology is interesting, and Ian may be able to tell you more about this, but you can see that you've got this yellowy colour, which is tidal deposits linked partly to the flooding of this area from the Solway Firth. You've got the peat that's so valuable in this area, and then the blue is glacial till. which is, it's all the higher areas. You can see this is a sort of slightly higher area. So these bits over here where the main farms are on the higher knolls. And that is a geology that contains rather more hard, bigger stones and harder elements than the tidal deposits or the peat. And what's interesting is the wall itself here chooses to run along this higher ridge of glacial till. And so that's worth bearing in mind. And our little site sits here on the edge of that ridge, and Milecastle 79 is also on the edge of it there. And Milecastle 79 is the only other area where there's been, apart from Bowness itself, there have been excavations. And the interesting thing about the excavations there, primarily, aside from the details of the Milecastle, was that the original excavators suggested that Milecastle, and indeed the wall in that area, had been built on a nearly 1.5 metre high platform, artificial platform that had been created of gravel and other materials upon which to build the Milecastle and the wall. They suggested to raise it above the possibility of flooding from neap and high tides. And so that was an interesting question in the background. Could we find any evidence for this platform? And there's some interesting information about the sort of history of the wall that you can find looking at older sources. And you can see here that, in the past, Hutton in 1801 came across, reported the wall in this area as being already without facing stone. And that in the 1850s, Collingwood Bruce reported that in some places the wall did survive at several feet high, but also that people locally were in the habit of blowing it up with dynamite. So we already can see that the wall was considerably under attack. But this Irving Coates drawing from 1877 is really interesting, because what it shows is a mound of wall core, which is being used as a hedge boundary, about 4 foot high, and only surviving because it is a hedge bank. And the interesting thing about long runs of the wall in this area is that it's surviving within hedge banks. Although, of course, the hedges themselves cause problems because as they grow, the roots run down into the archaeology and prise it apart. And the other thing that's very noticeable about this area is how significant drainage and water is. And right along this wall line, the line of the wall here, which is on the hedge bank, there's a drain. You can see that the crop mark where the wall isn't surviving in a hedge bank, you can see where it's been stripped out and just survives as a crop mark below, indicating below the ground archaeology, or at least disturbed archaeology. And I reckon that this bit of hedgeline is likely to be in this sort of area because there's no indication of the drain. So in the sort of area that we are working in, there's our little site. And another of Coates's drawings, you can see here, which he calls core of wall, 1/4 mile west of Port Carlisle. And you can see it's looking northeast. There's the Firth, and you can also see that there's a hedge boundary here running up towards the Firth. So to me, that looks like, if not exactly where we were working last year, very much in that vicinity. And you can see that despite all the evidence that I've just been talking about, there were some surviving courses of facing stone in that sort of area. So we anticipated that there would be little of the wall surviving. And in we went. We did geophysics, and really all the geophysics shows is the difference in geology between the two sides of the wall. There's that little surviving bit. Here are excavations, and you can see these bits of geophysics were done on the same day with the same instrument, and they indicate that we've got very different geology going on. That's the magnetometry, and in the resistivity, similarly, there's not really very much we can pick up from that, except that there are possibly geological phenomena and possibly bits of the ditch, but it's difficult to be certain about that, although there's a possible dip in the hedge line that might suggest that the north ditch does exist north of the wall in this area. We did one trench because we saw these stones that looked rather like surviving facing stones in the right sort of place. And Rob gallantly went ahead, dug trench 2 to find that actually those were repositioned facing stones that had been disturbed by another building that wasn't marked on the maps, probably Victorian, and maybe had been used in that building and then had been put into the hedge to buttress the hedge after that building was removed. So we had more evidence of disturbance of the wall, this time by small agricultural buildings, and those Victorians had left behind bottles and bits of pottery as a testament to their stay. Then the other trenches that we did were the two parts of trench 1, either side of the hedge bank, in the position where we knew there had been a building in the 1970s. And indeed, the farmer knew about the building and remembered it blowing down in the 1970s and then reforming the hedge bank. And what we discovered there was that indeed, there was no sign of any turf wall. There was no sign of any surviving wall. There was a lot of wall core that had been used partly as a hard core for the building, and then shoveled up and recreated as the hedge bank subsequently. But what we did find, interestingly, was that there were big chunks of solid sandstone geology on the southern side. On the northern side, there was very much more silt and evidence of flooding. So you could see what that geophysics was reflecting. And indeed, we found also that everywhere there had been attempts to control the flooding with a rubble drain on one side and other drains that had been cut through the remains of the wall core and alongside the northern side of the hedge bank as well. So the wall had been very much under having a hard time the results of drainage. But anyway, what we were able to do was to work with Heritage Consolidation to consolidate the bits of wall remaining. You can see we've protected it with stone in front of it. These bits have been the tail ends of the stone bedded with a proper lime mortar, and indeed we found that when we looked at the other side of the wall, that all of the northern side had really been undermined by the drainage and the flooding and had gone completely, and it was really, we found that the poor condition was sort of fully revealed. But what was there was looked after and re-fenced. The gate was wired shut and a brand new spanking gate put in. So there you can see that's where, before we started excavating, and that's the final new gate in position. So quite an unusual little project, but found some interesting things, I think, about the wall. And I think led us to hypothesize that the idea that there was an artificial platform was perhaps unlikely, and that what the excavators had encountered was part of that geological phenomenon upon which the wall had deliberately been placed to give it a good foundation, but also a run along that higher bit of glacial till. So that was Port Carlisle. And then there was Cambeck, and this was joyfully when we could join with you all as volunteers, and it was a really pleasant and exciting excavation, because we found considerably more, I think, than we expected to. But why we were at Cambeck was to look at a bridging point across a minor watercourse, so not like the big bridges at places like Willowford, but also to find out more about the condition of the wall remains. There's no above ground wall archaeology at this point, and to find out, if we could, anything about the nature of the bridging points, because the gorge itself is not actually part of the scheduled monument. And so information that would help us going forwards to suggest ways in which this should be looked after. And here you can see that's the location of the excavation, and just a little bit northeast of there, upslope, is the known location of turret 56B. Turret 56A is expected to be in this sort of location, but hasn't been found. Castle 57 is made of and on, Campback Hill Farm is made of and on Castle 57. And then, of course, uniquely south of the wall, not on it, is the wall fort at Castlesteads with its vallum wrapping round to the south. Again, no remaining above ground parts of the fort, although there's quite a lot of sculptural stone in the kitchen garden. And here you can see a nice mid-19th century map, which gives you a sense of the steep incised character of the gorge of the beck. It's not huge, but actually it's steep-sided and quite deep because of the nature of the geology. Very soft red sandstone, not very good for building, but good for a beck to cut through. And I think you can see this is the old mansion for the Castlestead estate in the barony of Gilsland. And one wonders about whether material from the fort and the wall might have been used there. And this is where the fort is, the location of the current manor of Castlesteads. And again, that was built in 1791 at a time when sort of estate beautification and the building of little things like viewing platforms and follies was very much in vogue. And again, a moment when you wonder about the use of wall and fort stone in those sorts of enterprises. And this just gives you a better idea of the sort of landscape, against somewhat different both to the central wall landscape and to the coastal sort of landscape we've just been looking at Port Carlisle. There you can see turret 56B. This is quite a slope running down towards the beck here with the excavation site, Castle 57, and here's the fort location. And here on the old map, and the reason that I put this up on, not so old, 1970s, there's the excavation location, the course of the wall and the ditch, and of course the vallum way off down to the southeast from here. But then here's the weir. Now this weir is partly a natural weir, as the beck comes over a harder band of stone, but it's been considerably enhanced, and I'll show you a photo of that in a moment, with stones built up to about 4 meters high. And you can see in the side of the beck, you can see the profile of the ditch on this side, and you can also see that this bank is considerably lower than the west bank, which has been more severely eroded by the swing of the river at this point, the beck at this point. So there you can see that's looking this way towards the excavation location here. This is sort of the line of where the wall comes through. In fact, it's a little bit, now we know it's a little bit further to the south this way. And the number that's pointing to lines of worked stone that are possibly Roman. A question being that was looked at earlier was whether there was any surviving worked stone that had fallen into the beck or could be observed in the sides of the beck. And that just gives you a sense of the force of the beck coming over the weir here. And you can see here the stones that build up the weir. Of course, question, are those Roman? Now, here is the red on red of our excavation trench. And you'll have to take it, unless you were there, take it for granted when I explain to you that this line here, I hope you can just about see the wall core rubble running through. Now, most of that wall core rubble is the local soft red sandstone. And there is some bits of the sort of better, harder stone amidst it, but it's mostly local stone. So it's become incredibly mushed and soft over the centuries, and as machines run over it. And the people who excavated the turret just up the hill, turret 56B, noted how they could put their spade through the stones of the rubble of the turret, and how the stone had disintegrated into a sort of clay and rubble mix that was created simply by its disintegration. What we didn't see amidst this rubble core was any mortar. We did see it in this building down here, and I'll come on to that, but we didn't amidst the core. But the excavation 2019, which did pick up a little bit of the core, found bits of mortar. And so we're wondering whether it so happened that the 2019 little excavation actually picked up a bit that had been repaired. And there are records of the wall in this sort of area needing quite a lot of repair, the wall and its mile castles and turrets, because the underlying geology is as it was called by the excavators, treacherous, because it's so sandy and it can be a really difficult mix of compact and soft. But no mortar here. And then next to the wall, a ramp or stairs, that's the foundation for some kind of ramp or stairs running up alongside the wall, with here the foundations of a tower that supported the top of that and sent the bridge out across the beck. And in this area here, the excavator there discovered remains of the turf wall, just a little bit surviving, from which we were able to take a sample. Unfortunately, we haven't got the results yet back from those, but we should do soon. And then, very excitingly, not just some evidence for the bridging, but also 2 buildings, and these really were unexpected. The first building, which had at least a stone foundations, I'll show you a better photograph of this soon, sort of wrapping round like this. We caught one corner of it with a beautifully laid cobble surface inside, with an oven half set into it. And then after some time, a second building after this one had gone out of use, which may have had wooden walls, but certainly had a kind of clay and rubble floor foundations. And that's interesting because the description of those foundations in building 2 are very akin to the description of the core and mortar that we found in 2019. So maybe there's something going on at a similar time there. But all the diagnostic bits of pottery and amphora and their fabrics that were found here, mostly in relating to the 2 buildings, are dated to the early to mid 2nd century. So this is the first building, this is the second building. Both of them were built and were in use in the early to mid 2nd century. They may have started a bit earlier and finished a bit later, but certainly within that early part of the wall's history. So maybe this building could be associated with the building of the turf wall and the stone turrets and things that went with it. And perhaps building 2 associated with the replacement in stone or with a phase of repair and change in around the mid 2nd century, perhaps after the the retreat back from the Antonine Wall. So really interesting. Now, just to give you, this is the site drawing of the final trench. So what you saw in the photograph put on a plan, and there you can see a little bit more clearly the core of the wall with the robbed out facing on either side, the foundations of the ramp or steps, and for the tower, again, robbed out all round. The foundations for the building, the first building with the stone surviving here with a little half, and here the second building with the clay and rubble floor, and again, robbed out some sort of wall, potentially a wooden one. There were some possible post holes. And here, the big stone that sat this in the middle of the trench that we fished out on the last day with the digger, which when we got it out and measured it, matched perfectly the stones in the Weir. The hypothesis therefore being that stone that had been used perhaps in the bridging works had been robbed and used to build the Weir. There's a better photograph of the foundations of building 1. And you can see that the cobbles of its interior surface, and there the very dark hearth in the corner. Now, when Peter Hill looked at the sides of the gorge of the beck in this location, and also at any bits of stone that were loose in the beck or on the little beaches, he was looking to see if there was anything that was identifiably Roman. He did find things that could be, and also this possible voussoir, so part of the wedge-shaped stone used in an arch. and suggested that because of its depth and because of the unevenness of the banks, there would have needed to have been quite a substantial stone structure to take the wall over the beck. And he suggested it came out from the east and up to the west. Now, the excavation seems to suggest the reverse. And I think this is more in line with other bridges, that it comes up on the east bank to take it across straight to the west bank like that. More details will come in as we get more of the experts' reports and the dating from the environmental samples. And the interesting thing is, what's really quite exciting, two things, is that this is this is Willowford Bridge over the River Irthing, just east of Bad Oswald. And here you can see an early version of the bridge with a bridge tower here, like the one we have at Cambeck. And Bridge 3 included a soil and stone founded ramp up to the bridge. As you can see, I've marked on that later phase. And fascinatingly, this area here, which was not dug, is exactly where we found our buildings. So maybe there's more yet to be found at the Willowford Bridge. But a nice comparison between a bigger bridge and the phases and the character of a smaller bridge over the Cambeck. So really exciting. Right, very briefly, Heddon and then on to Cambeck. Now, Heddon, we weren't looking at the curtain wall, but what we were doing here was a little bit more akin to perhaps the work at Port Carlisle, in that we were looking at the survival and fate of an aspect of the wall. And you can see that here's Heddon, and here's Throckley, and here are 3 fields south of the B6318. There have been different agricultural regimes in those 3 fields. And this one, the far eastern field, has been regularly ploughed. There's also remnants of mining activity in the field. So that's the most disturbed field. And what we were wanting to do was to see how the vallum had survived in those conditions, because it's much more apparent in the other 2 fields. You can both see it as a change in the topography of the ground. You can see a dip and rises where the mounds of the vallum might be. Remember, the vallum is a big ditch with extended lip on either side, and then mounds either side beyond those extended lips of the ditch. And the ditches really are big of the vallum. So, whoops, sorry. There's a Google Earth image, an aerial view, and you can see this is the Far Eastern field. And you can see there are marks in the field, a darker line, which you would expect to be the ditch, with some paler bits where the bounds might be. They're more pronounced in the other fields. And what we did was we put in a long 40-metre by 2-metre trench, and this one we had to do again without volunteers, although we did have quite a number of visitors. And if we take out the detail and blow that up, you can see we found the ditch, and here are the 2 mounds, and they do broadly match with both the geophysics that we did, although that was very difficult to read, it was very disturbed, and with the soil marks and the crop marks at this location. And this is a long section of our 40-metre trench. So this is one of the sides. It's this side here, running through this photograph here. So the side that looks east, and you're looking west when you face it, and it runs from here, that's this end here, all the way through up to the top end. And this is the surviving south mound, and you could just see the stone within it, and specifically what was very clear was where there had been bits of turf and water had pooled against the edge of the mound over time, and that you can see this dark staining here, which suggested to us that what had happened was that the ditch, which is here in the yellow circle, flanked unfortunately by 2 field drains, showing how it had affected the drainage. The material from the ditch was dug out and used to build the mounds, but that the turf had been stripped off from under the mounds because there was no surviving turf line, and used as curbs along with stone to hold the mounds in. And we could see that. We could also see the ditch had partly naturally silted up, but then there had been a deliberate backfilling of it, presumably when they wanted to use the field for agricultural purposes, and then that ploughing over time had gradually levelled it out. So it only just survives, but there are traces of it surviving. But what it shows is the effect over time of agricultural, of ploughing in particular, and indeed industrial processes on even such a substantial monument as the Vallum. Finally, Corbridge, where we saw many more of you, and again that was a wonderful few weeks. And here's the aerial shot of the trenches just before they're backfilled. So let me talk a little bit now about the two trenches. And we've had pottery report back, and we've had a report back from someone looking at the slag. So the remains, the sort of remains you get from either blacksmithing or working iron, purifying iron, working it into a state where it can be used to make things. And the interesting thing is that the report that came back from the slag expert suggests that there was a kiln for iron somewhere in the near vicinity. And what it seems to be is that layers in Trench 4 included bits of the dismantled kiln that had been involved in it had been dismantled and then mixed into levelling layers that were spread over this end of the trench, which I'll tell you more about. So just to remind you, here is the English Heritage Site with Corbridge Roman Town, and we were working to the north of this road, and here is on the playing fields. The playing fields used to be part of the school, just over here, and outlined in red on the geophysics are the trenches that we excavated, and this one was partly on the footprint of one of the earlier excavations and is pick up the line of this road that's very clear, and also whatever's going on here where there's clearly some ditches or rubble or something interesting. And this one, looking at this, you can see there's a very rectangular feature, and we wanted to pick up and see what that was, hoping that it might be a building with its short end onto the road, which is a very classic sort of position. And here we are. This is Trench 4. And I'll show you the plan next with some of the details on. But this is the road here running east to west, and that was a road of more than one phase. The first road was narrower and had a plain ditch running alongside it on about this line here. You can just through here, and then the later road was wider and had at this end this beautifully built water conduit running along the side of it that was actually fed by a drain that ran under the road and ran into it like this. And we've taken the flags that were on top of the conduit to protect it off in order to look at what's inside it. And we're really excited to see what results come back from the environmental samples that were taken from the fill of this water conduit. At this end, you can see these big, slightly, they're flatter, bigger stones. There looks like there may be the remains of a later building that's encroached on the road here. And there was the remains that you can see of a wall of an earlier phase and flagging. And we suspect possibly that just to the east is quite a substantial building. And what we're looking at here, at least in one phase, is the backyard, as it were. And there were the remains of a building here. And there had been, that was one phase. Then there had been a period when it had all been levelled and material had been spread across it, and various ditches and pits were then dug into that level layer, and that was what contained the remains of the iron kiln. But then, very intriguingly, at this end, lots of pits, as well as the linear ditches which ran across, lots of pits had been cut into that levelling layer, often intercutting. You can see there's intercutting pits here. And in this one in particular, complete and near complete beautiful Samian and courseware vessels came out, and they were very much enjoyed by our pottery specialist. And here you can see again, this is the end of excavation plan. Here's the West-East Road of several phases, one phase with the conduit, and to the south, the partially paved yard with building remains, and then at a later phase, levelling, and then the pits cut into it. And the dating from the pottery, we haven't yet got the radiocarbon dating, suggests that the activity in this trench was focused on the early to mid 3rd century. And what's interesting about the pit that contained the complete and near complete pots is that there was one huge grey ware pot in the middle, which was likely complete originally. It had been damaged across the top, packed around with complete and near complete Samian and other courseware pots. It wasn't a kiln, but it was a deliberate arrangement of things in a pit. So a really interesting find there. And here's trench 5. Now, the geophysics suggested the possibility of a rectangular building, and indeed, here we have the rectangular building. You can see the stone foundations, and again, that seemed to be of more than one phase. And certainly at one phase, there was an annex which had artifacts associated with it, including jewellery that suggested a more domestic use. And the main building contained a big oven and a water trough and other small structures, possibly linked to a commercial activity of something that was facing onto the road. And I think we will have a better idea of what exactly that activity was as we get more details back from, in particular, the environmental samples. And the activity here began perhaps a little earlier than Trench 4, at least what we could identify, and carried on a bit later into the later 3rd century. And what this tells us is that Corbridge town was an extensive settlement right from the very early days. And this was an active and busy part of what was going on in the town. So I think I'll stop there, but thank you all very much. All of you who have taken an interest, who've come out and dug with us. We absolutely, couldn't have done it without you, but it was also incredibly enjoyable. And I hope very much that we'll be all out on site together in some iteration of something or other very soon. But thanks very much.
Thank you, Jane. That's it's brilliant to kind of revisit and just see how much we've done and how much you guys have been involved with. And just a reminder that right at the start of this year, how we couldn't, you weren't able to come out and join in with us. And then that first day at Cambeck, when the sun was shining, I remember being out and just being thoroughly excited because we could see you again and we could all be out together. So yeah, quite a journey actually when you reflect back. So thank you, Jane, for that. We're doing good for time. There was one question in the chat, Jane, which we've got time to kind of answer, I think. Malcolm's asking, did you find the ditch this is going back to Port Carlisle. Did you find the ditch at Port Carlisle? If I recall correctly, it hasn't been found for sure that far west, with the view that the proximity of the sea led them to decide not to build it at that point.
I think the answer is that the jury's out, really. There was what might be a ditch on the geophysics, and you can see possibly a dip in the north-south running hedge lines north of the wall that might suggest that there's a ditch there. We didn't see it in our excavations, but we probably would have had to pull quite a bit further back and gone a lot deeper to be absolutely certain. And it was not the time and the place, and also probably rather wet. But the people excavating the Mile Castle certainly didn't think it was there, and no proof yet that it was where we were. And we certainly know that the flooding comes right up to the location of the curtain wall at that point.
Thank you. Oh, Rob just answered a question in the chat from Abby about if the drawing from illustration of the Peter Hill proposed bridge structure at Cambeck was specifically for Cambeck or somewhere else. And
specifically for Cambeck. He drew it on the back. He spent he looked very carefully at all the stone in the sides of the gorge and in the that had been put along deposited along, and some he thought could be Roman, but his feeling was that there must have been some kind of structure, and that was his hypothesis for Cambeck specifically.
Cool. One more question before we have a little titchy break from Alistair, which says, what does the stairs at Cambeck do for the wall walk / no wall walk controversy?
So Cambeck. Well, you see, we don't know whether it was a stairs or a ramp. What we didn't have was any proof either way. Certainly, there was the foundations of something that must have been an approach up to then supported by the tower of a bridge over. But what we couldn't tell from those foundations was whether they were the foundations for a ramp or for stairs. So it could go either way. Actually, it could be that it was supporting stairs that would mean that it was just pedestrian, or that it was supporting something wider that could have allowed other traffic through. I think people have hypothesized both ways, and there are fords and things just a bit further south that would allow wheeled traffic across. So I don't know if Rob's got anything to add to that, but I think that's broad.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think it depends on how much confidence you can draw from the parallel that Jane showed at Willowford, which also kind of agrees with what's been found at Chester's Bridge abutment as well. And so even if there wasn't a wall walk in the earliest phase of whatever sort of bridge work, the fact that there seems to be that platform, which might be stairs or a ramp, suggests there probably is something there in a subsequent phase. But Jane's point about whether or not that would actually be a full bridge in later phases is a good point, because actually, unlike at Chester's or at Bert Oswald, the bridge doesn't have to be directly on the line of the wall because of the position of Castlestead's fort slightly to the south. So that it's both. It's either infuriating or intriguing, depending on your perspective, and that it could be parallel to other wall sites, and therefore we can draw similar conclusions. Or because of the situation of Castlestead's, it might be quite unique.
Thanks, guys. Catherine is our resident tech wizard, basically. Anything we need in terms of maps and GIS and apps and that kind of thing, we just go to Catherine. So I'm going to invite Catherine. She just wants to share a few things that we've been working on as well, which you might hopefully find of interest.
So I am hoping to give you a bit of an update on the database and WallGIS side of the project today. Is that full screen now? Perfect. So you can see, well, first off, I've been able to sort of start finally pulling together a bit of the data for all the data from the database, and a lot of this data was gathered by volunteers during lockdown, which has been extremely helpful. The database side of things now, we have almost 500 records in the database, and it's finally kind of getting to the point where we can see some patterns and start looking at things in more detail, which has been really nice. So I've pulled together a few maps. So what we're looking at here on the screen are a couple things about turrets. And on the top is the kind of confirmed and assumed sites for turrets. So the yellow is ones that we know exist. They've been excavated and they've been found. And in blue is assumed locations. So those are just known based on wall measurements from other known sites. And some of these they've dug in those locations and they haven't found anything. Others we just don't know. But we can see those there. And on the bottom, we have looking at sort of where the doorway is positioned in the southern wall of the turret. And where the doorway is kind of dependent on which kind of group built the turret in some cases. And it's just kind of interesting to see where that's kind of clustered. But the big thing when you're looking at the turrets here is you can see that the western end, we just have almost no idea where any of the turrets are, and very little information about them running out towards Bo'ness and the end of the wall. Here we've got our mile castles, a couple of maps about mile castles. On the top, we're looking at the different axis types. So this is whether their long or short axis. So this is essentially the north-south measurement of these mile castles. And if it's a long, the long axis ones have a long measurement running north-south, and the short ones have a short measurement running north-south. And you can kind of see from the symbology that the rectangles in the direction are, the direction of the rectangle is the axis type that we're looking at. And on the bottom of the map, we've got different gateway types. And so again, depending on the who built the mile castles and what period they were and things like that, they have different types of gateways. So we can again start seeing some of the patterns and some of the clusters of these structures going along the wall. And once again, we can see that the western end of the wall, we have less information, and there's just less survival of these sites at that end of the wall. And in some cases, just less work has been done at that end as well, so we just don't know. And the final map is one that's quite interesting, actually, because we know that there's changes to the width of the wall as we kind of run the whole course of it. And some of this is changes in how it was, the decisions of how the wall was built. At the western end, where the intermediate wall is, this is, you know, the rebuilt stone wall on top of the earlier turf wall. And so we can just see some of those changes. And again, it's just nice to kind of finally kind of see these differences and be able to pull this information out of the database. I've spent a lot of time looking at just tables and tables of information over the last few months, and it is getting really exciting that we can, we're starting to make these connections. So going forward, there's still a lot of work to go into the database in the next few months. And ultimately, all of the information that's sitting there will be connected through to mapping, and we'll be able to make more of these maps and more complicated maps than these, because these are just the very beginning of what we'll be able to do and the kind of queries that we'll be able to ask of the information. But big thanks to all of the volunteers who have helped with this, because I wouldn't have been able to do it myself, and it really did make a big difference to the amount of information that we've been able to add into the system. So, and this will all be available to download by members of the public and research and things like that at the end of the project. And so you'll be able to go and look at that information that you helped gather and put together. So that's going to be really interesting, and it'll be really interesting to see what people can do with it as far as research and things like that going forward. So thank you again. And that's that's all I've got for the database. Just a quick update.
Thanks, Catherine. Those maps are awesome. I echo what Malcolm said. That's the first time I've seen those. And just to sort of put this in context, just while Ian fertles around with his presentation, obviously we're a World Heritage Site. The UK Commission for UNESCO, who are based down in London, they heard about this sort of crowdsourced information. So you guys doing the research to feed into the GIS, exactly what Catherine's just shown those maps sort of demonstrating. They got wind of the fact that volunteers had been out gathering that information to feed into the GIS, and they absolutely loved it. And they got in touch with us and said that's amazing. And this is one of these. They wanted. Well, I have since written a case study about sort of the type of information that you guys have been gathering and sort of how that's helping the wall community create not only create that GIS, but use that GIS and how it can be used as a sort of management tool going forward. So for all that you think you were maybe just sending us sort of some bits and pieces of information, it's pretty critical, and people are noticing. Like say the UK Commission for UNESCO noticed that we had volunteers out doing that, and they were all over it and got in touch with us. So I think that's just worth flagging and worth celebrating, actually, because otherwise you can get entrenched in kind of just what you do on a day-to-day basis. But in the family of World Heritage Sites around the UK, they were interested in the fact that you guys have been doing this research as well. So thank you. It is a real heartfelt thank you. And so I'd like to welcome you all back after your little leg stretch. And we're going to hand over to Ian, who's going to talk about the stone sourcing and dispersal work. So Ian, you've got about half an hour if you want to share a screen, if you've got a presentation. If not, that's fine.
Great. Okay, thanks very much, Kerry.
Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Lovely to see you all. I'm going to share a screen because I've got some pictures to show you. I think pictures are good, so there's plenty of those to see. How's that looking? You should have a nice photograph of a drain pipe underneath Drumborough Castle. So the stone sourcing and dispersal project, in my mind, has got two very much related but distinct halves to it. There are a series of research questions which this project has been about, and which it's been possible for all of you to get involved in. And there's still some more work to do as far as that's concerned, quite a lot of it, in fact. And also to get some more heavy-duty technology involved in actually understanding how we understand more about where the stone which Hadrian's Wall is made of comes from and how it got there, and indeed how we recognise that stone when it's reused within post-Roman buildings. But alongside that, it seems to me that a significant part of this particular opportunity to work on the wall is not just about the wall itself, but the context of the wall, the way that the wall relates to the landscape, what that landscape's about and how that landscape has formed. So it's a way for getting you all involved in understanding not just the archaeology, but also the landscape and the geology in which the wall sits. So let me just take you through the way which we approach this in terms of, if I can make my slide with this. Yeah, as I was saying. So I was just about to step through the stone sourcing and dispersal process to remind ourselves where we are in terms of the process. The first step in this process was about understanding the geology, giving an opportunity to go out and actually look at the geology that underpins the landscape of Hadrian's Wall and understand it in some more detail. Because it seemed to me by doing that, it would be really helpful in terms of understanding more about the material that's within the wall and how that material formed. The second part of it is about inspecting the wall and getting stuck into actually doing some measuring and detailed looking at the wall. Then the third part was to, having understood what the wall is made of and what the wall looks like in terms of its archaeological and geological content, was to then to go out and see if we can find something about where the wall has been sourced from. So looking for the quarries that may have been the source of the rock to make Hadrian's Wall out of. And then finally, to investigate the where wall stone has been reused in various post-Roman buildings around the place. So over the years we've been running this project, we've visited a large number of places to do each of these. So just going to remind you of some of the things that we've done over the years. So in terms of understanding the geology, we've been out and had a look at the Middle Carboniferous successions in the Hort Whistle burn, and also to look at the Wyn Sill and its exposure at Caulfield. We've been out to St Bees to have a look at the Permian Permo-Triassic succession of rocks there and the sandstones, which are more likely to be the material which the west end of the wall in particular was sourced from. And we've had a look at the Pennine coal measures on the eastern coast, and again some of the sandstones within the Pennine coal measures may well have been those which were used particularly for making the wall in the eastern end of the wall. And also we broadened that out and took a rather amazing trip out to Rockcliffe this year to have a look at some of the geology that is outside of the actual material that is used to build the wall, but to give a bit of a context for the way in which the Carboniferous and the Permian rocks actually formed. And alongside that, also to understand, and particularly again for the western end of the wall, that as Sarah will tell you, there's lots of exciting erratics which arrive on top of the fields down in that part of the world. And understanding what's going on to the north of the Solway Firth was an interesting way of getting an understanding of what was going on there. So this year we've been lucky enough to spend a bit of time out on the coast here at Hartley Bay, just north of St Mary's Lighthouse, looking at the top of the Carboniferous succession, which is exposed in the Hadrian's Wall area. We had another opportunity to go back to Hawkwhistle Burn and spent an exciting amount of time scrabbling around in this particular limestone here, looking for fossil crinoids and other things, and exploring the middle Carboniferous succession. And as I say, we also had an extremely hard-working field trip out to Rockcliffe to look at the extraordinary succession of Silurian turbidites, Devonian granites, and here we're just on the boundary of a very major fault line, just to the right of where the volunteers are sitting here, and some extraordinary Carboniferous sandstone rocks right early in the sequence of the Carboniferous on the north side of the Solway here. And in terms of inspecting the wall, so actually going and looking at both the archaeological and the geological content of what we can see in the wall, and that prior to lockdown, we managed to get out to look at Buddle Street, Black Carts and Hare Hill. Images here of Black Carts on the left, obviously, and Hare Hill on the right. And since lockdown, we've been able to get out again and do some more examining of these wall stones and collecting more data about the size and dimensions of the stones which form the wall, and other things that you might find which are anthropogenic in terms of things like Lewis holes and the way in which the stone has been dressed, and maybe very occasionally inscriptions, but also more particularly to look at the geological content of the wall. And we've been able to get out this year to look at Chesters. We've had a couple of trips out to Chesters to look at the material which the fort is constructed of here, and to the turret at Denton, and a rather nice day at Plane Trees here, complete with a company of a bunch of cows that wanted to join in as well. And also to Bird Oswald as well, and we're lucky enough to have a bit of time here with Tony Wilmot, who took us around the bathhouse and gave us a bit of an explanation of what was going on at the dig there, which I imagine some of you have been following on, and there's been a programme on fairly recently about this, talking more about what was been found there. And all of that work has allowed us to gain a more detailed appreciation, let's say, not only of the dimensions and the anthropogenic side of what goes on with the wall, but what's going on within the structure of the rocks that we can see. So things like, yes, you can see here, sedimentary banding that you can see it, the grain sizes and the distribution of the grains that you can see within the rock. And our volunteers have been great in recording that data. More to go as far as that's concerned. We've then been doing some unearthing of the wall rock, so actually going and looking at where some of the sources of this the material might have come from. So heading out to Walltown Crags and having a really detailed look at some of the potential sources for material. And this particular one was done in the absence of volunteers right at the very beginning of the year, at the same time that the dig was going on top of Walltown Crags. We were able to do some comparisons of some of the material you can see here. Actually, these were close to where the dig was carried out on top of Walltown Crags. And this material here is within a small scrape, which you can see in this image here, which is some sort of old quarry. I'll come back and talk a little bit more about that later, because not only did we go and actually physically look at this, we took samples of this, which we can, more investigation is in the process of being done on these rocks. And since then, we've also been very lucky to have Katie O'Donnell working with us on the project as well, who's given her knowledge and expertise around the Roman quarries. And we've been able to go out with Katie to visit some of the classic Roman quarries to understand a bit more about what sort of evidence we can find within old quarry sites that tell us that it's Roman as opposed to something else. So looking at some of the quarrying techniques and the way they were applied, the way that stone was weathered, and the nature and shape of some of the rubble heaps and other things that are tell us that this is probably very Roman. And here we are at Fallowfield, and again we know this is a Roman site because stone was taken out here with inscriptions on it, which is now at Chester's Fort. But also there are other things like there are marks on top of the stones where stones were partially extracted from the quarry, which also gives us information that this is quite definitely a Roman quarry site. We also spent a bit of time going out and had a very exciting walk out to Kings and Queens Crag, quite close to Housesteads, another glorious day, and we're able to see some other quarry sites. And again, there was some information here from inscriptions that were found still in situ on one of the crags, although we didn't manage to find it on this particular occasion. But again, to get a sense of what these Roman quarry sites are actually like. And this one of the much larger quarry sites, huge amounts of material available to turn into Roman stone. And as part of this unearthing the source rocks, we also were lucky enough to have the services of Natasha, who came in to give us a real sense of what it's like to actually take a bit of stone and hit it with a hammer and turn it into all sorts of entertaining and beautiful things. And some good things are done by volunteers, making some wonderful stone carvings. And we were also able to do a comparison with a very much modern quarry, which is Beresford. The wonderful Dan doing the finger pointing here gave us an excellent day out, including some very fine bacon sandwiches, to show us around how modern quarrying compares to the way in which the Romans may have carried out doing their extraction and removal of stone. We also learned a lot about aggregate as well, as Kerry will be able to tell you. So the final part of the process was to actually investigate repurposed stone, to find examples of buildings in which Roman stone may well have been reused. And again, we were drawing on the information that was found during the investigating the wall stone, having picked up a much more detailed knowledge of what Roman stone looks like, both from an archaeological point of view and also from a geological point of view. And this is a picture of Drumbruff House. Well, you can call it Drumbruff because that's what it's spelled. Oh God, I can never remember which way round it is. Drumburg, that's it. Drumburg Castle. And you can see here stones, the sandstones here, which are very much the sort of shape you would expect from Roman stonework. And interestingly, as Catherine's introduced from the Harl work we've done there, that there is almost no Roman stone remaining in situ along this part of the wall. So a lot of the evidence we have for what the Roman wall may have looked like are actually now within these post-Roman buildings. And this particular, the reason I put this slide up here is you can see at the bottom here, this row of much more rounded stones. And these are actually the erratic stones that I was talking about. So these are material which have been transported by ice, by glaciation, and transported right the way across the Solway Forth some 10 or 100,000 years ago and deposited in the fields around. And it's quite a common thing within this part of the world to use those field stones to form the foundations, the cornerstones of many of the buildings that you find in this part of the world. We'll come back to those in a minute. And we're also fortunate with the volunteers to be able to go out, and we went out to the remains of Holy Cross Church at Wallsend here on a beautiful sunny day. And also went to Bruff by Sands Church here with some lovely examples of some cross-hatchet dressing. Again, maybe typical of Roman stone, so probably quite a bit of reused stone within the church here. And a nice example of the type of walls that you find. This one from Fort Carlisle, I think. And you can see this extraordinary mixture of stone with these beautiful erratics, which are grey wackies from the Silurian succession that we saw some of at Rockcliffe, which again have been transported right the way across the top of Solway. And then there's these other sandstones, which it's questionable where they've come from, but are very likely to be part of the Permo-Triassic succession, of which you find exposures away down south around Maryport, St Bees, and then north across the other side of the Solway around Gretna Green, and further west in places like Gelt and outside of Carlisle. So maybe transported a fair distance rather than coming from a local source. And yeah, there was some fantastically diligent volunteer work that went on here. So yeah, I doff my cap to Sarah in particular for coming out shortly after her hip operation and still being there in the rain recording stone. Yeah, top dollar work there. This at Lanercost Priory with its extraordinarily ambiguous set of stones, which may or may not have come from a Roman source. Rob explaining that to us inside Lanercost Priory. And again, some more work they were actually doing to take measurements here at Drumburgh Castle. So alongside all of that practical outdoorsy sort of work, and indeed taking us back to a time before we were able to meet outside and smile at each other, just a reminder that there was a lot of work done in order to provide material in order to support the stone sourcing and dispersal work, which is there in perpetuity as material which you can reference to help support the work which I'm going to be talking about in a moment, which is ongoing in terms of the stone sourcing and dispersal project. But maybe of interest more generally as well in terms of understanding the landscape and the geology that is around the Hadrian's Wall landscape. And also that there is an ongoing set of communication which is going on, and there is a large selection of blogs which I've written for the Stone Sourcing and Dispersal project, which again looks outside of the project. So it takes things which are relevant to the Hadrian's Wall environment, but talks in a more general geological term about those, which again, they're all there. And if you want to get stuck in and do a bit of reading, I can recommend them anyway. I think some of them are quite nice. And also a reminder that we were lucky enough to have the services of some really genuine geological experts in the shape of Kees van der Lande and Sanne Sikkelen and Stuart Jones, and indeed Derek Teasdale, who came and gave us a series of talks giving us a lot more technical detail about the various geological successions, and indeed some of the way in which geologists have explored, exploited and reused some of those successions as well. And again, all of the material that these guys talked about are still available online to go and look at if you're interested, or indeed to remind yourself. There's a lot of detail in some of these talks, and I find myself going back to them to try and understand parts of it. And in parallel with the volunteer work that's been going on, there has also been some more technical work, which I've been undertaking by way of geochemical analysis and petrographic work to use this portable X-ray fluorescence spectrometer on the left in order to do the geochemical work, which has been entertaining and frustrating in equal measure. There will be more about that as I start to understand a bit more about what the geochemistry may or may not mean. There have been some really quite significant issues, both in terms of the operation of the device and in terms of what the geochemistry can or actually can't tell us for a whole bunch of reasons. The petrography is now very well underway, and we have a large collection of samples, both from wall and quarry locations, but also from other geological locations, so that we've got a comprehensive comparative set of samples from which we can do both geochemistry and more particularly petrography. And now in the process of actually doing some work to actually do that petrography. And there's some really new, exciting and whizzy kit which has appeared in the archaeology lab fairly recently. In particular, it's a Kientz microscope, which is phenomenally good at producing some really nice images. And there's all sorts of things to play around on it. This is just a set of images which I've been produced over the last week, just to give a sense of what some of those rocks look like. This is relatively low magnification. The microscope is capable of being able to explore these rocks at much higher magnification than this. So this is something like 30 times magnification on these. And you can see there's a really significant variation you can see, just superficially looking at them, in terms of the grains, the variation in the grain sizes. The blue in these rocks is the porosity, where there are holes in the rock, and you can see there's a variation from this very holy rock, which came from one of the quarries at Walltown, as compared to this rock on the right-hand side, which is one of the grey wackies that was collected within the tumble at Port Carlisle. And you can also see the variation in terms of immediately some of the iron minerals within this particular sample, again from some of the tumble in Port Carlisle, as compared to, say, this sample next to it, which came from Maryport and one of the St Bees sandstones. And what this will allow me to do over time is to compile evidence about precise mineralogy that's in there, and the quantities of those mineralogies and the way they formed. And what we're looking for is things which can actually allow us to characterize those sandstones more precisely. So this is one of the St Bees sandstones from Maryport. And one of the interesting things you can see here is you can see this little shaded brown line here in a grain of quartz, which has then got an overgrowth of quartz over the top of it. And this is really very characteristic of the St Bees sandstones, and it's one of maybe a number of quite characteristic things about that particular type of sandstone that maybe allow us to identify particular types of sandstones that have been found in particular parts of the wall. And one of the other things which this microscope allows us to do is to actually do some quantitative analysis of what's going on in here. And using the difference in colour between the blue of the resin and the porosity and the other colours in the rest of the rock, it's possible to highlight those using this rather garish red colour to show up what the porosity is. And you can see that, you know, 3 different samples, the way the porosity is distributed and the amount of that porosity is really very different. And again, this may be something we can use as a way of characterising what's going on within those rocks. There's still a lot to learn. It's a new bit of kit, and it's been a voyage of discovery and understanding how it works. And I'm hoping there's a lot more that we can draw out from that in terms of actually diagnosing what's going on, and also to produce some spectacular, and I hope some beautiful images as well as we go along. And one of the things which I'm hoping that we can do with this, and this goes back to, this is the Canbeck dig, which you'll probably recognise from this one of a handful of possible remaining bits of facing stone, and also some of the bits of material that were picked from the tumble within the Canbeck dig as well. And you can see on the left-hand side, these are fluvio-glacial materials, so bits of granite. Again, down here you can see a bit of Silurian turbidite. And these are things which have been brought in from quite a long distance. But you can also see there are some different types of sandstone here, which even superficially look different. And one of the questions that would be really nice to answer in a more categorical way from a geological point of view is whether the facing stones were sourced locally, and we collected samples from the local Kirtland and sandstone here, and also from the Weir material as well. And it will be very interesting to see if we can further categorise the relationship between the blocks which are in the sandstone, the material which is in the from the Kirtland and sandstones, and those samples which were extracted from the dig. Similarly, at Port Carlisle, where we have a small amount of upstanding wall and this trench that was dug, samples again were taken from the tumble within those walls, and again, comparing those to, it's interesting how the set of samples that came out of the tumble were remarkably similar in many ways to the sorts of things which you see in the local walls. And indeed, the relationship with some of the major industrial structures. So this is the remains of the viaduct that Catherine was talking about earlier on. And again, there are remains of sandstones that were brought in order to construct that that viaduct and the construction works required in order to carry the railway lines, and it will be interesting to do a comparison between all of those to see what the relationship is between stone which has been brought in by the railway, material which has been reused within from the Roman wall, and where that Roman wall material came from. I'm not going to go through these slides in any detail. I'm conscious that we're getting, I'm running out of my allotted time. But just a reminder that with the work that we're doing now with SSD in terms of pilot about how to, for you to start trying out the various tools and techniques we've got in terms of the SSD app and the SSD database, that there are many things to be done here in order to be able to continue to help answer some of the research questions, but also to get out there and do more looking at the Roman and post-Roman structures, and also to be able to do some archival work to help that as well. Just very quickly to say that we also were very much involved in the Stories in Stone exhibition at the Still, which was a fantastic example of time to be able to showcase what we've done. And particularly from a geological point of view, I really enjoyed working on this particular project to highlight the extraordinary relationship between the landscape and the geology, and the way in which we have both exploited it and also need to think about how we can use the geology in order to be able to help solve some of the problems that we have at the moment, in particular in terms of climate change. So yeah, that was one of the geological showcases of the story, which yeah, some lovely bits of stone in there. And also finally to say that we also have done some outreach, a little bit of outreach to some of the local schools as well, which for me, I have to say, was one of the more enjoyable pieces of work. Actually building real Roman walls with real pieces of stone with youngsters was, I have to say, absolutely fantastic to do. And I got one of the best thank you cards ever. So that's, in a nutshell, is what's been going on with the SSD project. And just as a very final thought and a plug for what's going to be going on next week, I'd just like to introduce you to this fellow here. And if you want to find out more about that, come along to the thing next week. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Ian. That's brilliant. Thank you. It always strikes me when we do this and we pull all of the aspects of the project together, just how much and how ambitious WallCAP is in what we're trying to do, how we do it, how many people we've got involved. So that's one of the reasons I really love this session today, is because it really just everything hangs together really beautifully. So hopefully your mind has been inspired and blown in equal measure in terms of your role in this project, in terms of the heritage at risk and the stone sourcing and dispersal, the two major strands, and just how important it is and significant and valuable it is, the contributions that you've been making towards WallCAP. So yeah, I know we could talk for hours about some of the hard work, and we could interrogate Ian for another hour, but we're trying to keep today short and kind of snappy. There is a question in the chat, Ian, from Leslie about what were the type of fossils at Haltwhistle. Would you mind just popping the answer in the chat? Is that okay? And then we'll kind of...
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I've just spotted that one.
Thanks. Brilliant. So we've got 15 minutes and we will finish at 4 o'clock because I'm militant when it comes to timekeeping. So I'll keep my bit as short as possible. So there is lots of work going forward. Rob's mentioned the Village Atlas work, which we'll be telling you more about as we go forward. That's a huge piece of work, working with lots of different communities along the wall. There's the SSD in action work that some of you are doing, so doing the archival research, the data entry, that will all be hopefully completed in the next sort of month or so, we hope, so Ian's got time to do something with all of that data. And as and when other opportunities over these next few months can come up, we will be first to sort of share them or sort of ask you if you'd like to get involved with them. So we're in this unusual period of, we'd love to do loads more of everything, but we've also got to write all of this up as well within this next sort of 6 to 9 months of WallCAP. So we're going to try and keep the communication going and keep you involved as much as possible. And with that in mind, I want to say thank you very much for whoever, if you contributed to the volunteer satisfaction questionnaire at the end of last year, which was the online questionnaire, we had the best response we've ever had to that in terms of number of people contributing. So if you were one of them, thank you very much. I look at all of the comments, I look at the statistics, what percentage of people are happy with different things or not happy, and that's where we focus some of our activities. So for example, I'll start on a bit of a negative. The volunteer portal, it was a bit of a 50-50 split, how easy people feel it is to use, and I completely understand that, because it's not the sort of thing you use every day. So it's, you've got to kind of remind yourself how to use it and how to navigate around. So we've looked at that one. I take that on board. What was really heartwarming was to see the amount of positive comments and the levels of satisfaction you have with things like our training program, being involved in the excavation. I think one about the approachability of WallCAP staff, that was like in the 90s. So thank you for that. That does mean a lot to us, because we're trying to distill a research project into a community project and try and pushing the two things together. So the fact that you feel that we're welcome enough and friendly enough to just sort of email or ask us questions or stop us in the street, then that does mean a lot, because it means that we're doing something right. So that's great. Thank you for that. Something that we asked in the questionnaire was about this idea of a sort of self-sustaining group that might pop out of the end of WallCAP. And I know Rob sort of mentioned it right at the start. So one of our legacies, I guess, of WallCAP is that there might be a group of people who then want to take something forward beyond WallCAP. And we asked in the questionnaire if anybody was interested in that. Now, if it came back and it said 2% of respondents said they were interested, I've got a problem. But almost 50% of respondents, of you guys, said that you were interested in doing something beyond WallCAP, which was impressive, really impressive. So that's great. So now we need to, again, do something with that. We also asked what type of activities, if you were a sort of self-sustained group, the type of activities that you might like to get involved in. Things like research, practical conservation, monitoring, they scored quite highly. And also what scored pretty high were events, people getting involved in events. The next question on the questionnaire was about what level of support would you like to just go off and do your own thing? Would you like a bit of a balance between some clear objectives and the opportunity to have your own sort of say on what you do, or absolutely no sort of steerage from just go off and sorry, there was three. There was one which was lots of support, medium support where you can make your own decisions, and sort of no support. So we asked people to vote on that. And again, it was really clear that people wanted the middle one, which was have some clear objectives, but be able to develop something yourself. So with that in mind, I've been thinking about how we take this forward, and again, sort of revisiting those people who said they'd like to get involved, because we've got another 8 months of WallCAP. So my role can be to support the development of that type of group. In between all of this, Abby, who we've already met, where's Abby? Give us a wave, Abby, you're on there. Yeah, she's there. Oh, she's gone all very corporate with a picture of the Hadrian's Wall 1900th Festival behind her. We're very lucky within our WallCAP team to have Abby, not least because she's lovely, but also because Abby in the last couple of months has been appointed to be the Community Engagement Coordinator for the Hadrian's Wall 1900th Festival, which, as you probably know, gets launched on Monday, on Hadrian's birthday, and is a year-long festival to encourage communities to get involved and develop events and activities to celebrate their connection with the wall. So Abby is kind of one of us, but also helping work with community groups to develop projects. So I just want to invite Abby to say a few words, because we had a coffee and cake. Maybe we were just highly caffeinated, but we came up with an idea which we thought we wanted just to chuck in today and just to sort of see what response we got. What I will say is we haven't got a lot of time to discuss this today, so we'll sort of just chuck in our idea, and then after today I'll email everybody and we'll set up another Zoom for anybody who wants to take this further. I think that's the most efficient way to do this, so people don't have to sort of vote to do it today. So Abby, can I just invite you to introduce yourself and maybe explain a little bit about what we discussed?
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Kerry. I'll just talk for a couple of minutes because I know we're getting short of time. And I hope everyone here is aware of Hadrian's Wall 1900, which is the year-long celebration taking part in 2022. And I'm just popping the website into the chat there if you haven't seen it before. The event is year-long. It launches on Monday, on Hadrian's birthday, and it runs to December the 23rd, which is the last day of Saturnalia. So as you can see on the website, there's a huge range of events and activities being offered as part of this celebration of 1,900 years, approximately, since the building of the wall. So very, very briefly, we've got a range of events. We've got the purely intellectual, historical events like lectures, talks, book launches, conferences, reenactments, etc. We've got a lot of partner activity going on, a lot of stuff at the visitor attractions and forts along the wall. There's geographical based activity, there's guided walks and tours. Somebody's taking a drone along the length of the wall, there's orienteering, there's geocaching, somebody's doing a taxi tour. And some of those is the more traditional paths, so let's go from the Sill to Sycamore Gap, but some of those are built on the local knowledge and expertise. And as Rob said earlier, sometimes it's the local farmers that can tell you the most interesting stories of all. There's a lot of creative interpretations of their historical element. So we've got art exhibitions, plays, musical concerts and other creative interpretations of what Hadrian's Wall means to these people. Then we've got events that riff on the cultural elements, so looking at Roman food, medicine, herbs, etc. And then we've got a huge eclectic range of events that are not so deeply embedded in the Roman history, but have a Roman element introduced to them. So, for example, we've got a village fete, we've got a ukulele concert, a gong bath, cricket festivals. Now they're themed because they're bringing in Roman soldiers or decorations, or because of the particular location in which that activity is taking place. So as you can see, the sky is the absolute limit in terms of what events can be part of this festival. It's absolutely key that we are not looking here to engage at the highest levels, although of course they are welcome, but we're trying to connect with the communities of the wall. We're trying to unearth what the wall means to you and your community and how you want to celebrate it. Now we've got 50 events listed already. We've had over 200 submissions so far of people who want to do events, and we're working with them, we're supporting them to try and take them to the point where they can list their activity as an official event. But we don't want to stop there. This is an ongoing festival. This is a year-long activity. There are no deadlines. We're encouraging and hoping to develop activity throughout the year. And this is where you come in, because we were thinking over our cup of coffee, what do the WallCAP volunteers want to do? How do they want to get involved in this? Now, of course, the WallCAP events themselves, they're listed as events. We're listing the conference, we'll be listing the village atlas, but this isn't about WallCAP, the organisation, it's about WallCAP, the people, and what you want to do. So we'd like to invite you to consider, in the context of what Kerry's just said, that there's a considerable amount of interest in continuing as a group after WallCAP very, very sadly finishes, and invite you, if you would like to consider the organisation of some kind of event as part of the festival, whatever kind of event you want. And before I pass back to Kerry, we would be able to support you in that. Both myself and Kerry would be available to help mentor and support that, but it would be your event led by yourselves. So that's our fantastic idea, and I'll pass back to Kerry.
Thanks, Abby. Yeah, we just thought with another 8 months of WallCAP, and with Abby, like, so lucky that she's already a volunteer with us and is involved in the festival, that rather than getting to the end of WallCAP and then sort of saying, off you go and set yourselves up as a group if that's what you want to do, we could support that now. So if there's any ideas for events, it could be, I know there's people, I know you guys are really skilled in terms of your knowledge and things, so it could be that you think, actually, as a group we could set up some guided walks, or we could do a Roman event, a Roman food event or something. I mean, you can let your mind go. You could do express yourself in the medium of dance somewhere along the wall as a collective and have it badged up as a 1900th event. There's some shaking of heads there, I've noticed. Not that one then. I'm just trying to provoke and see if there's any reaction or people saying, oh, actually that might work. So yeah, it is an invitation to, if as a group now you had some ideas or wanted to come together and develop something which you could deliver between now and the end of September, before WallCAP's finished, so you have our full support in terms of, you know, helping you work up the event or get any permissions or anything like that, then we'd very, very much support that. But again, you might think, oh no, I'm not interested in that at all, and that's fine. All we're doing is taking the feedback from the volunteer satisfaction questionnaire, which said interested in doing something going forward, we'd like some clear objectives but our scope to do it ourselves, and we're interested in events. So I've taken that and gone, there's potentially a solution or an opportunity for you to get involved in something. So what I'm not going to do is spend any more time necessarily. Oh, who's got a tutu? Neil, I knew you'd have a tutu. Great. I don't want to kind of necessarily go down that sort of have a discussion about it now. We just want to sort of plant it and let you go away and have a little think. So unless anyone's got any immediate observations or comments, I think what we'll do after this session is I'll email everybody again and invite you to come to a Zoom if you're interested. And then from there, we'll get probably a smaller group of people who might want to do something. If you've got ideas of activities that you'd like to do, then please bring those to that next meeting. But without putting anyone on the spot right now, I think we'll just kind of leave that one hanging. Is that okay? Unless anyone's got anything they want to mention. Okay. I'm taking the silence as like your minds are too busy with ideas and you're thinking about how to set yourselves up, and I'm going to take that as a positive. So I'm going to leave that there, but that was Anne, thank you for that little crying emoji, or the laughing one rather. Okay, I'm going to leave that there, but thanks Abby for sort of giving that flavour of the things that the festival is, the types of activity that the festival is involved with and encouraging. So I'll email after this with information about another meeting about it. The only other thing, we've got a couple of minutes to finish off, and I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to have a big chat and things. It's really hard to try and squidge everything into a few hours. It's really just to flag a few dates going forward. So Monday, Hadrian's birthday, start of a 1900th festival. Next Tuesday, the 25th, it's a busy month. Tuesday evening, we've got the next community talk, which will be, given that it's Burns Night, we'll have the Antonine Wall giving an update on their National Lottery Heritage funded project. They're rediscovering the Antonine Wall. It's on our social media and on the website, so if you want to sign up for that free talk, please do that. Next Friday to Sunday is the Mirror on the Wall conference, the sort of academic conference that Rob's been organising, which is, I'm not sure why I'm mentioning it because all the places are fully booked now, but that's happening. And then after that, in February, we will have the launch of the Hadrian's Wall Virtual Networking Days, the community conference. So that's Saturday, the 27th of February through to, that's the launch day. And then Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, the 1st to the 3rd of March will be our series of sort of pick and mix talks across those 3 days. Last year we did a launch on the Saturday and 5 days of talks with the sort of idea that people would just pick what they wanted throughout the week. What happened is people came to everything, and the weather was glorious, and I felt terrible that we kept everybody indoors for a week. So we've shortened that down to 3 days, and so that'll be the 1st to the 3rd of March. So it's a Saturday in the following week. We have sent a save the date out. We haven't sent the programme out because we're still collating all the speakers and everything. The two themes for that event are to celebrate the 1900th festival. It will be badged up as a 1900th event, and also to celebrate the fact that it's the 50th anniversary of the World Heritage Convention, of which the convention then led to the inscription of World Heritage Sites. So it's a really important marker. I think we'll be celebrating that across that event. So that's really just a few dates for your diary going forward. We've just hit 4 o'clock. So if I just want to say thank you to the team for preparing those presentations. It is great just to see everything hanging together. And I just want to say thank you very much to everyone for coming and sitting for 2 hours. I know it's been glorious weather again. It's always the same. It's never raining or anything when we're on these Zoom calls. But I just want to say thank you. It's a big heartfelt thank you. It's been, as Rob said right at the start, it's been a tough and a challenging year to continue to deliver a project. Some lottery projects just paused when the pandemic hit, but we've managed to keep going. And I think that's definitely down to your enthusiasm to want to keep going as well, because you could have all just not engaged with the project, but you didn't. You kind of kept coming back to all our events, and you came out on excavation, and it's been an absolute pleasure once again to keep you engaged and give you things that you feel are worthwhile to do. You know that I'm not all about archaeology and Romans, all dead stuff. I like the living. I like you guys. You get a little bit more interaction, and you're much more. It's much more fun for me. So it's been. Yeah, it's just been an absolute pleasure to keep you engaged and give you worthwhile things that you think are worthwhile to get involved in. That's a big deal for me. So that's why I do what I do, because I really like it. So unless there's anyone wants to say anything, and I'm really sorry we haven't had a chance to hear from you. It's just trying to keep sort of to time and, like I say, squash a lot into this session. But yeah, it's just a big thank you, and we look forward to seeing you at the next event. But just keep talking to us. Email me if you've got any questions, queries, and you'll be hearing from me with regard to this potential kind of group idea going forward.